evening and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. I'm Rebecca Munro and this is Scotland at 7. And today I am joined by Chris Law and Roza Salih. So, Chris, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing well, thank you. It's been a long day in Parliament and I'm looking forward to this session because it's the last order of the day, but probably the most important.
Go home, get to your bed and just chill for a bit.
Indeed.
Yeah, and Roza, how are you this evening?
I'm great, thank you. I've had a really good time today.
Oh yes, definitely. Definitely. Well, we'll start with our daily coronavirus update first. So as of 2 p.m. today, a total of 2,399,521 people in Scotland have been tested through the NHS Scotland labs and UK government regional testing centres since the start of the pandemic. Of these, 2,067,066 have been confirmed negative. 332,455 have tested positive. There are 1,604 new cases of COVID-19 confirmed by a test, although not everyone with the virus will display symptoms and not all those with symptoms will be tested. There are 13 new reported deaths of people who have tested positive. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection now stands at 7,813. This number only includes those who have died having received a positive test for the virus in the previous 28 days. Of the people who have tested positive, 529 were in hospital last night, 47 of whom were in intensive care. As of 8 a.m. this morning, 3,984,433 people had received their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccination, and 2,995,086 had received their second dose. The latest UK daily figures show 128,823 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 98 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings, not just hospitals. On to the ONS update now. The percentage of people testing positive continued to increase in England and Scotland in the week ending 10th of July 2021. Trends in Wales and Northern Ireland were uncertain in the most recent week. Delta is the most common COVID-19 variant across the UK. Hospital admissions of COVID-19 confirmed patients in England continued to increase in the week ending 11th of July. There were 213 deaths involving coronavirus registered in the week ending 9th of July 2021 in the UK, accounting for 2% of all deaths that week. In May, mortality rates due to COVID-19 decreased for the fourth consecutive month in both England and Wales. The proportion of deaths involving COVID-19 has decreased in those aged 75 years and over since January, likely reflecting age prioritisation in the vaccination programme. Now on to our first story of this evening, which is Nationality and Borders Bill. Humanitarian groups have warned that Priti Patel's new asylum legislation will do nothing to address the root causes of dangerous channel crossings following a record-breaking day of people arriving in Kent in small boats. The Home Office said that at least 430 people made the crossing across the Dover Strait on Monday, a new daily record. In Dungeness, also in Kent, about 50 people, including women and young children, were seen arriving on a beach after crossing the channel in a single dinghy. The previous daily high for arrivals was in September, when 416 people arrived in the UK from across the channel. Patel, the Home Secretary, pledged to make the crossing unviable, but people have continued to make the dangerous journey this summer. Patel's flagship asylum legislation, the Nationality and Borders Bill, which had its second reading in the Commons on Monday, has been branded the anti-refugee bill by critics. But refugee charities have said that as well as being cruel, the bill would not solve the issue of channel crossings. The bill would make it a criminal offence to knowingly arrive in the UK illegally, and people could face up to 4 years in prison. It also includes clauses that would allow the UK to send asylum seekers to a safe third country. 8 boats carrying 241 people arrived in the UK on Saturday, and to date, nearly 8,000 people have reached the UK this year, according to analysis by the PA Media News Agency. The dinghy that reached Dungeness is believed to have left northern France or Belgium earlier in the day before crossing the 21-mile Dover Strait. It was watched by the Royal National Lifeboat Institution as it approached before landing at about 1 p.m. The migrants included children who were too young to walk, and some of the people needed help as they walked onto the beach. Despite the surge in such crossings, the UK continues to see far fewer boat arrivals and asylum claims than many of its European counterparts. At least 44,230 people have arrived in Europe via the Mediterranean by land and sea so far this year, according to data from the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. Despite the sharp rise in small boat arrivals in the UK south coast, asylum applications in Britain fell in 2020 to 29,456. This was significantly lower than the 93,475 asylum applications made in France and the 121,955 in Germany. So, Chris, Priti Patel's very first sentence of her opening speech yesterday about the Nationality and Borders Bill was, "The British people have had enough of open borders and uncontrolled migration." Do you think this is a fair assessment? I mean, do you personally agree with this statement?
No, I think this is a situation that's been born out of 10 years of the UK being a hostile environment as part of the Home Office's drive against people from Europe, people from outside of Europe, and frankly against its own citizens, as we saw through austerity, for example. I work in international development, so I'm well aware of some of the issues that refugees face around the world, whether that be persecution for their religious beliefs, fleeing famine or war. As you can see in Yemen, we have the world's largest humanitarian crisis just now. And when you meet with the UNHCR in these countries, whether it be in Kenya or Sudan or Ethiopia, the stories you hear are truly harrowing. And people are incredibly vulnerable, and they're vulnerable to traffickers. And those traffickers exploit those vulnerabilities and those fears. And it's those who have been causing such chaos and such flood of migrants to come towards Europe, and not only through Europe, but towards the British Isles. So this bill isn't about the protection of refugees. It's certainly not about upholding what's been a 60-year-old UN Convention on the State of Refugees. And what it ends up doing is criminalising the very people who are the most vulnerable in our world today. So the answer to your question is no. I wholly oppose the position she's taken. And the last point I would say in this is a new kind of Britain. During the referendum in 2014, I campaigned for traditional British values. This doesn't reflect that. And if we just go back to people like Lord Alf Dubs, who is in his 90s now in the House of Lords, he's a former child refugee of the Second World War, and he is appalled by what's been said and what's been done. So, yeah, it's completely wrong-headed, but it's probably one of the lowest things we've seen this year so far to come from this government.
Yeah, so Roza, like, considering what Chris has just said, is this an example of Britain turning its back on genuine refugees? Are we becoming hostile rather than welcoming?
Yes, I mean, people is referring to fixing the broken system, which is correct that the education system is broken. However, this bill is making it worse for many genuine refugees, like myself, which mean that people coming through Britain. So this is a big worry because it means for many asylum seekers and genuine refugees, they will be criminalized when they come over here. They have been criminalized through this bill, and they have been referring to many aspects of the bill that they are criminal and they should be punished in a way. And this is the kind of word that's being used through the bill and our more media skills. So it has a lot of problems. We talk about safe routes, but there is no mechanism, there is no details in the bill. What are these steps? There's not a lot of debate actually being made in the parliament about the bill. It's been pushed the bill, but I can talk about it a lot because it has a lot of problems, and also the United Nations said and has been critical of the bill itself because it's going against the Geneva Convention in 1951. So yeah, we're going backwards in a way, and many campaigners and politicians also actually who are trying to improve our immigration system for many years, so we're actually taking a step backwards. So it's very worrying.
Yeah, and Rosa, I mean, human rights groups are appalled by these proposed measures. I mean, the UNHCR has warned that the bill breaches commitments under the Refugee Convention. I mean, do you agree with their concerns? I mean, or what are their concerns that you agree with?
Yeah, I agree with the concerns, and many political parties who speak in the House of Commons today who are from the opposition parties are against this bill. And I think it's clear that the Tories don't understand what refugees actually go through and what they think. In order to devastating losses and families they have to leave behind. But also the fact that family union, refugees who manage in a way who are not legalized or criminal, they're not allowed to unite with their families. So the bill actually goes into detail in many aspects of it really goes backwards. And talking about people who have minor offenses, who are maybe removed from the forces, but manage to come back in a way they will be imprisoned for over 5 years. These are the last complications within the bill. It goes really against our values, as Chris says, many British values. Let's not just mention Scottish values, but the United Kingdom, this bill goes against many moral values. Um, yeah, it's very problematic, and I hope that the bill actually loses and many politicians opposes this bill.
Yeah, Chris, I mean, is this vaguely reminiscent, would you say, to the US style Guantanamo Bay policies? You know, policies that human rights lawyers have rallied against for years.
So I think that's a really good question. I used to chair the campaign to close Guantanamo Bay,
Mm.
which was putting people on another territory, in this case it was Cuba, waiting indefinite times in order for trial. Some who were put there actually during the invasion of Iraq 2003 are still there. So that is one of the parts of it. But the problem with this, I mean, so what they've tried to do is they've talked this up as if it's tough talking, that they're going to take action against the migration of refugees. And by the way, the migration is trafficking. We need to be very clear here. What the bill should be doing is actually protecting the victims of human trafficking and going after the criminals and the gangs in particular that are involved in this modern slavery. And I have to say, this act is actually music to their ears. So that's a fundamental issue. And I think if you look at the language that's been used over the last decade, I spoke about in Parliament the last week or two, the UK Conservative Party isn't unified in this. In fact, there has been more and more splits happening, particularly between more established Conservative MPs in Parliament for some time and the new Conservatives that came in under Boris. And we saw that recently in the debate on cuts to the most vulnerable in the world, which may well lead to an excess of 1 million lives being lost of children alone. So I think what's happening here is you've got gesture politics, and it's a move to the far right, frankly, because of the Brexit Party and because of UKIP, and they think this is a vote winner. In actual fact, here in Scotland, refugees by the Scottish Government have been wholly supported and fully supported by Scots from all backgrounds. I think we're proud of the fact we're a Munro nation and the fact we're made up of people from many different nationalities. And most importantly, what's been missed in this is the huge contribution that refugees who've come here and made of their lives here to our culture, to our diversity, to changes in our society which have been for the better. So if I look at Brexit, if I look at the pushback with cuts to international development and ultimately to the world's poorest, in this bill, this Nationality and Borders Bill, they're all one and the same. They're a never creeping step to the right. And the last point I would say on this is we need to remember the UK has got a permanent seat on the Security Council of the UN. And also is hosting COP26 this year. And the big question now is the UK government still credible as a force for good in the world? And with the cuts to aid, which includes cuts in climate, the inability to welcome refugees and go after the traffickers, this is further steps of it not being global Britain, but a short, nasty, poor and brutish Little Britain. And I think that will shock most people in a wider society who still support traditional British values, because this is a far step removed from that.
Yeah, and I suppose there is also a question there, Rosa. I mean, has Brexit made Britain more right-wing and intolerant to migrants? Have we become, as well, really polarised in this decision? Some people don't think Priti Patel's going far enough. Some people think the idea is absolutely abhorrent.
Let's be honest about it. Brexit has a huge effect on how politicians are speaking in Parliament, and this bill was actually specifically have brought forward by the Tories. Instead of actually debating employment law and workers' rights and actually important issues that have affected our society, they want to throw in an immigration bill attacking refugees and genuine people. And we are actually not taking our share of refugees. This bill makes me really angry. It's unacceptable. And when people were the politicians were debating, I was actually getting sick. Why we're actually debating this in Parliament? We should be debating on most other important issues. Let's just look at statistics, and I have written it down. We have 24% have dropped in asylum claims. So the Home Office and the Tories preferring that we have so many refugees and these kind of scary stories from the far right is to scare the public. And this is actually doing this. Let's look at our we say that we are the highest number of in the UK that we've accepted refugees. That is just clearly not true. Germany, Sweden, Norway have taken far too many refugees and asylum seekers.
Yeah, and Chris, as well, you mentioned briefly about the language used when regarding refugees, and it's a lot of emotive language. I mean, people are using the words invasion right now. I mean, and especially with Nigel Farage and Brexit, but do you think this has contributed or perhaps even exacerbated the kind of negative perception from some British people towards migrants?
There is no doubts about it. There is a problem with the number of people coming across, pushed by traffickers into the UK. That's been agreed in the 2019 report for the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, of which Priti Patel sat on. That was agreed cross-party. But this is not the way to tackle it. And so there has been a language problem since David Cameron came into office in 2010. But actually, they have not been, the UK government of the last decade has not been keeping the reins on the language being used in broadly the printed press, certain sections of the printed press, and more so even on social media. And we need to push back when something is clearly racist. To give you one example, what happened in the England game just a week and a half ago, where they talked to where Boris Johnson couldn't make it clear that dismissing the decision of the England men's football team as being gesture politics when it clearly was, sends out the signals for a small minority in our society, we should add, it's not the majority, it's a small minority, to feel that they have strength and voice and they can amplify that voice, which ultimately means that the UK government doesn't make the real decisions, the bold decisions that are set under the UN, they're human rights, they're things that we are signatories to, and instead we get led away from the key values that we held across these islands for a very long time. And I'm very pleased to say they're not welcome here in Scotland. And I would just say, although I'm an SNP Shadow Secretary in International Development, Labour have been very clear on this as well, that what we have here is a hateful, nasty, anti-refugee bill that is going to continue to allow gangs of traffickers to work very successfully in France. This will not stop it. All this will do is jam up the asylum system, which has been already becoming very difficult in recent years. You just need to see the fall off of applications. And I can't see how this is going to benefit the UK as a whole, nor indeed the people who live here. And in fact, what it makes people do is look over the shoulders going, where are you from? Why are you here? When in actual fact, we should be here. We're all welcome here. We're all Jock Damson's bairns and we all belong.
Yeah, and Rosa as well. I mean, is there a danger that credible organisations like the Royal National Lifeboat Association, I mean, could they be criminalised under this new bill merely for saving lives?
Yeah, I think that's what the danger is. That charities, people who are assisting refugees and asylum seekers could be criminalized under this new powers coming through this bill. So it's really worrying, and I think this bill is not improving anything in our immigration system. It's actually making it more complicated, and it's also supporting further payments, uh, invest. So more money is going to sorry, when people are trying to assist asylum seekers to come to this country, they are going to be punished further. And I think it's very, very worrying. People like myself who come to country through this route would be illegalized and criminalized. Um, yeah, so it's really devastating.
Yeah, and Chris, I mean, Priti Patel says that the asylum system is broken. But are the Conservatives, who have been in government for over 10 years now, are they not responsible for the system that they're now trying to supposedly fix?
I think you've hit it on the head, Rebecca. That's exactly right. The asylum system is broken. I happen to agree, as do most people across the political parties. But this is something the Conservative governments have had over a decade to resolve. They've had report after report, and there has been recommendations made in this report. What we see in this bill is not those recommendations actually fulfilling the concerns and the needs of a revised asylum approach to the UK. What it actually does is, as we've already spoke about, is criminalise people who not only are vulnerable, but are victims of trafficking, who may well be fleeing all sorts of adverse or horrific situations, and then come to this country and find themselves, through no fault of their own actually, because they've been encouraged, this is where to go. By the way, you may face up to 4 years in jail. Sir Nicholas Winton brought over 600 children, Jewish children, from the Czech Republic during the Second World War. He would be criminalised under this bill. And I'm glad you brought up RNL, because potentially they could be as well. So the idea of being able to rescue a human life, a human soul, and then when you come back to your harbour, that you're going to be arrested and potentially imprisoned, is just inhuman, frankly. There's no words to convey how absurd that is in terms of a piece of legislation, because frankly, it's a piece of rubbish. It doesn't work for anyone. But most of all, it doesn't work for the very people the government's pretending to protect.
Yeah,
And I think for just last point, I think it's a life sentence as well. So that very like parties and people who are assisting genuine refugees could be imprisoned. Instead of this bill actually improving our broken system, as the Patel refers to, such as giving rights to asylum seekers to work in this country and contribute to our tax income system, they are actually restricting refugee rights. So this is what baffling me and makes me really angry. Instead of we actually improve it, we're making it much worse.
yeah. And just one last question on the subject, Rosa. So I read that columnist Zarlish Halamzi was saying that seeking asylum makes you feel self-conscious about your very existence. I mean, does this bill increase the risks of refugees being rendered invisible and viewed as worthless by the British people?
This bill is affecting refugees in many ways. I mean, just myself, I know that other activists who have been on social media becoming angry about this bill. Yeah, it's really dehumanizing refugees. refugees. I don't think I can see any more when there's no humanity in this bill. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, we will move on to our next story of this evening, and that is on the first steps towards a national care service. Health Secretary Hamza Yousaf and Minister for Social Care Kevin Stewart have welcomed the first meeting of a social covenant steering group set up to help guide the development of a national care service. Establishing the group, made up of people with day-to-day experience of social care, was a key recommendation of Derek Feely's independent review of adult social care and marks the fulfilment of one of the commitments for the first 100 days of this government. Initial membership of the group, which met for the first time today, includes unpaid carers, disability rights activists, a care home resident, a campaigner for the needs of relatives of those in care homes, a social care worker, and others with significant experience of the way services are currently delivered. The diverse group includes people from across Scotland with a spread of ages and social, cultural, and ethnic backgrounds. The group is expected to help establish a common set of values and beliefs, a social covenant, which will underpin the national care service, including treating people with dignity, prioritising the common good, and ensuring there is a strong oversight of the new service. It will establish underlying and unifying principles to help guide decision making. So, Chris, is this an approach often used to influence government policy?
You'd like to see more of it, certainly. It's a good approach. If we think about the way select committees or committees work generally, they'll take evidence from a wide variety of voices. Often what happens there is it's usually the same voices keep coming back in again, usually the largest organisations. What I like about the way this is done in order to gather information is it's going to be from people, not only from organisations, but also people who've got real life experience. Myself, I was an unpaid carer for a period of my life with a mother who had advanced MS, who was obviously towards the end of her life. And there was very little support when I was younger for carers, both as an adult and particularly as a child. So I think it's really important to hear those voices from across our society, not just from the usual organisations that come forward. So to hear it from unpaid carers, disability right activists, I see also a care home resident, and those who've been campaigning along with social workers who are involved, I think is the right way to establish how you want to move forward. Because without real life experience, in many respects, it's pretty much academic. So it's really important to have these voices coming here.
Yeah, and Roza, I mean, do you also think this is a progressive step forward, or maybe something that we might be seeing more of in the future as an approach?
Yeah, of course, this is like the most exciting piece of legislation or the SMP's manifesto, I think the National Care Service and bringing back to the public sector. I think it's the most important innovation, it was stated since 1948. Elderly people are the most vulnerable people in our society, and we should be taking care of them. And I think the National Care Service would do that. And I'm actually really excited to see this implementation and the consultation, as Chris mentioned, that is going through a variety of people that will be consulted to make sure that we do implement the best services, universal services for many elderly people in our care homes. People don't need to pay money, and this will be a public sector that will be set to support them.
Yeah, no, it's definitely quite an exciting prospect. So, Chris, is the National Care Service designed to complement the NHS in a way, instead of being another NHS?
That will need to see an outcome of this, actually, this listening exercise. I would say, in principle, is the fact that it's set up as a separate manifesto pledge, then yes. But I think over time what they'll do is integrate, even though it will have slightly different priorities, let's say, to the NHS, but it should complement in the same way as the NHS and social care came together over the last decade under the Scottish Government. So I think it's a hugely important part, universal. As Rosa's just pointed out, again, at the point of need is the very same as what we experience with NHS, and so it should be. These are the kind of things that we all work hard for and we want to see from our governments, and they should not be compromised in the way they have done, certainly at UK level, for some decades.
Yeah, and Rosa, I mean, do you think this could become as important as the NHS in the future?
Of course, as I mentioned, that many elderly people, as a police worker, I have dealt
Mm.
with many elder people. Um, Sometimes, they're struggling to make payment for carers, and they are in the older stage of life. And I think this will make a huge difference to people's lives, to working class families, who are getting older, and they cannot afford to pay for carers, or they don't have family members who are survived or siblings, and this will make a huge difference to improving our society. And this is the things that we in Scotland are trying to improve. And I'm so grateful for Scotland and being a citizen of Scotland.
Yeah, and Chris, I mean, I don't know if we're quite at this stage yet, but do we know how it's going to be paid for?
No is the straight answer. There is actually a currently parallel discussion going on at a UK
Right.
level with social care there, which is we were supposed to hear some sort of outline this week of how that were to be. However, it looks like it's not going to happen until September. But what I do understand is that Boris Johnson, Rishi Sunak, and the new health secretary are at odds with how it's to be paid. One suggestion is through national insurance, but the problem with national insurance is that it's young people who will bear the cost if it's across social care, which includes obviously care for the elderly. So I'm not sure where it's going to happen from yet.
Fair enough. And Rosa, just last question on the subject. When do you hope to see it come to fruition?
So when am I going
When do you hope to
see it?
When do you hope to see it? Yes, come and become a thing.
As soon as possible. I think for the Scottish government, I think they're looking into a 4-year, 5-year plan in the government to do, as far as I'm aware. I'm not elected politician.
No problem. Well, we'll move on to the next story. And that is that 1 in 3 children in the UK are now living in poverty. A new report from the Social Mobility Commission has concluded that almost 1 in 3 children in the UK are living in poverty. The report urges the UK government to invest significant sums of money into child welfare, scrap the 2-child cap and increase universal credit by £10 a week, the equivalent of the Scottish Child Payment before the SNP government pledged to double it. The Commission, which is an independent body that advises the UK government, concluded that 4.3 million children are now living in poverty across the UK, an increase of 700,000 in 2012, and that a support package of £14 billion is required. The investment would lift 1.5 million children out of poverty, as well as helping many more out of deep poverty. Commenting, the SNP Shadow Fair Work and Employment spokesperson Chris Stevens MP said, "This report concludes what we already knew about this UK Tory government. They are failing millions of children across the United Kingdom." Mr Stevens went on to say that the SNP have long called for the recommendations within this report, including making the universal credit uplift permanent and extending it to legacy benefits. And he again called for the scrapping of the 2-child policy, which would lift millions of children out of poverty. So, Rosa, the Social Mobility Commission's calls for an end to child poverty. Is it also important to look at why places with low social mobility coincide with certain demographic groups?
Yes, the short answer is we see an increase in child poverty, and as you mentioned, the statistics, we see an increase. And since 2012, as far as I'm aware, there's over 700,000 increase in child poverty. So the Tories really need to act and do something about this, but they are refusing to do so. And this is the sad reality that the UK government is not listening to the people across the country, the United Kingdom. This is a statistic of child poverty across the UK as well. And in Scotland, we have put a mitigation in place, like the child payment, child payment, which has been doubled recently. However, the Tories are making further cuts. Just for example, looking into the universal credit. There are criteria and 5 weeks waiting payment for someone that actually needs this money to survive. So all of this within itself is affecting families, and especially child poverty has increased.
And Chris, do you also believe that inequality has perhaps increased due to COVID, and that children have perhaps borne the brunt of the effects of COVID?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. All the indicators that we have seen over the last, certainly that have come out in the last 6 months, even a year, have seen the gulf in inequality deepen rather than narrow. And going back to the earlier point about social care, right now also child poverty is the key things that we should be building forward better with out of the lessons from COVID. All of us have been affected with COVID, either through losing a loved one or a friend or a colleague, or somebody being adversely affected as a result, and many people losing their jobs who've got young families. So this would be an opportunity actually for the UK to step up on the outcome of this report, accept its findings, and actually it can't reduce the universal credit back to where it was before, and also to match the Scottish Child payment of the extra £10 a week to go along with child benefit. These are small steps that would go some way forward to starting to narrow what's becoming, what I see certainly, and certainly what the statistics say, is a broader gap in inequality and also rising numbers of children in poverty. And there's no part of the UK that gets away from that. Although Scotland has been marginally better with regards to 1 in 4, I have to say in my city of Dundee, it's actually 1 in 3 children that live in poverty. Nevertheless, England and Wales do particularly worse, but the main levers for changing this really are with the UK government, and this is an opportunity now to step up, not step away from the future of children's lives.
Yeah, and Rosa, I mean, the UK government dug deep to help the economy with the furlough scheme. Are you in agreement with Chris that, you know, it's time to remove the two-child policy?
Yeah, definitely. The two-child policy is affecting many families, but it goes back to the lack of investment that the policy is making to our welfare system. And you know, we are investing more in ourselves. These are the things that we should be investing in. We should be investing further in our welfare system, supporting working families, reducing child poverty. These are the things that we should be investing in. So, you know, going back to your question, we need to scrap the sorry the yeah, we need to support families further.
Brilliant. Well, we'll move on to the next story, and that is on the Dominic Cummings interview. Boris Johnson denied the NHS would be overwhelmed and said he was not prepared to lock down the country to save people in their 80s, texting his advisor, "Get COVID and live longer," according to new WhatsApp messages released by Dominic Cummings. Speaking to Laura Kuenssberg on the BBC, the Prime Minister's former chief advisor said Boris Johnson held out on reimposing COVID restrictions because the people who are dying are essentially all over 80. Cummings also told the BBC that Johnson had been determined to go to see the Queen in person, despite people in Number 10 already falling ill with COVID in March 2020, although Downing Street denies the account. In WhatsApp group messages shared that went sent to aides in mid-October, Johnson appears to say, "I must say I have been slightly rocked by some of the data on COVID fatalities. The median age is 82 to 81 for men, 85 for women. That is above life expectancy, so get COVID and live longer. Hardly anyone under 60 goes into hospital, 4%, and of those, virtually all survive. The Prime Minister also said in a message, and I no longer buy all this NHS overwhelmed stuff. Folks, I think we may need to recalibrate. Johnson also appears to text aides, there are max 3 million in this country aged over 80, and says it shows we don't go for nationwide lockdown. The release of these new messages will cast further doubt over the actions of the Prime Minister in the run-up to the November lockdown, a time during which Cummings and other senior scientists have said the Prime Minister was fiercely opposed. Cummings also alleged that Johnson, who came close to death after he was hospitalised with COVID in April 2020, told meetings in Number 10 that he should never have agreed to the first lockdown. So Chris, Boris Johnson has denied Dominic Cummings' claims that he said the people who are dying are essentially all over 80. Who do you believe, Johnson or Cummings?
Wow, that's like a choice between the devil and the deep blue sea. I think we're not going to bring up Barnard Castle here, but I think in this instance, I would have to put my money with Dominic Cummings, because time after time, Boris has been shown, in his own words, in Parliament and outside, to be duplicitous in often things he says. He makes U-turns on a whim and constantly says things that trips him up. This doesn't surprise me, but what I would say most importantly is what he did say just shows how little he's in touch with the people across these islands and cares little for them as well. He's the Prime Minister. I'm just trying to imagine if the First Minister had said anything similar, whether or not she'd still be in post. And so the question has to be asked, why is Prime Minister still in place, given this kind of language about our parents or grandparents? And let's not forget, Boris Johnson himself was barely over 50 when he got COVID. So this bravado, kind of braggadocious approach is the kind of stuff we saw with Donald Trump when he came out during the election after getting COVID and said it's fine, it's no biggie. And it's a terrible mistake, because you just need to look at the numbers in America and the numbers in the UK of those who have lost their lives as a result of COVID, and the UK's government's approach to England in restrictions to show that it's more likely that Cummings has been absolutely clear about this, which is there is a complete lack of empathy or understanding of what people are going through right now. And it's a tragedy, really, given the fact himself and his previous health secretary have both already had COVID. You ought to think they were able to show clear leadership and know better.
Yeah, and I mean, when a serving Prime Minister says as well, that calls the Daily Telegraph his real boss, I mean, Rosa, can he ever be trusted to look after people's interests and not his own?
I think that's an easy, simple answer, isn't it? No, I don't think he could be Mr. Johnson with nothing, to be honest with you, but he's been in the country. What is sad is that Dominic Cunningham said in the interview is that he didn't want us to go to lockdown because he was fearless and said that he's only killing elder people age of 80. So like people who are older, they're like young people, and he cares more about the economy. And this is the sad reality of a prime minister of the country. So he's actually running us. For me, he could have done so much things, restricted even our borders where COVID actually were coming, virus was coming in. There was no control over the virus, and so there was a lot of issues that I could say. But going back to your question, I don't.
No problem. And Chris, I mean, how do you think the Queen will react when she learns that Johnson was going to jeopardise her health by attending his weekly Wednesday briefing when staff members at Number 10 were isolating?
Well, this is the same Prime Minister that wants to spend upwards of £200 million on a new Royal Yacht Britannia from money that was allocated for the world's poorest and most vulnerable, and then name it in her dead husband's name. So I don't think the Queen will be entirely surprised. She's seen a number of Prime Ministers come and go in her period as Queen, and I can only imagine she's embarrassed. I actually got told off in Parliament last week for raising the royal family to even speak about it in Parliament because it brings it into the political sphere. However, the royal family put it on record that they were displeased at the fact of the new Royal York Britannia. So I think the word horrified will come to the royal family's thoughts when they think about Boris Johnson not paying attention to their needs as much as anybody else's.
Brilliant. Yeah, well, we'll move on to the next story, and that is Erdogan pushes two-state solution on the 47th anniversary of Turkish invasion of Cyprus. Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan said today that peace talks on the future of ethnically divided Cyprus can take place only between the two states on the Mediterranean island, in comments sure to further annoy Greek Cypriots and the EU. Turkish Cypriot officials also announced plans for the potential resettlement of a small part of the now abandoned Greek Cypriot suburb of Varosha on the island's east coast. That move, too, is likely to infuriate Greek Cypriots as essentially staking ownership over an area the United Nations says should be placed under the control of peacekeepers. He was marking the anniversary of a Turkish invasion on July 20th, 1974, days after a Greek Cypriot coup engineered by the military then ruling Greece. The island has remained split ever since into a Greek Cypriot south and a Turkish Cypriot north. Greek Cypriots, who represent Cyprus internationally and are backed by the European Union, reject a two-state deal for the island, which would accord sovereign status to the breakaway Turkish Cypriot state that only Ankara recognises. Decked out in red and white Turkish and Turkish Cypriot flags, the celebratory mood in North Nicosia on Tuesday stood in stark contrast with a sombre mood in the south, where Greek Cypriots were woken by air raid sirens, marking the day Turkish forces landed 47 years ago. So, Roza, do you think that the Turkish Cyprus should be recognised as an independent state?
No. So,
Fair enough.
I have a lot of knowledge about Cyprus and Turkey, and as far as I'm aware, the European Union have rejected the notion of two-state. I think it's very problematic and unacceptable to both communities who want a united regional Cyprus. So I think the people have to be consulted. Most importantly, the international community disagrees with Erdogan's two-state position. I can speak further.
No, not at all. No, I've just got in the Nationality and Borders Bill. Numbers. The bill has passed. It was aye 366, noes 265. So the bill's gone through.
That's really bad news and very close as well.
Well, I mean, do we have any
I am devastated, as you can see. Of course, it's going to go through the House of Lords now, and coming back. I have no hope in the UK government. Myself, you might know, I'm campaigning for independence, but this is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, Chris, is there any way to reverse this at all? Is this?
Yes, there is. And Rosa, I'll just give you a little bit of hope, not about the UK as such, but certainly about this bill. Because it goes against the convention of the UN Convention, of which the UK is a signatory, there may well be a legal challenge to this bill, which I'm hopeful that perhaps there's one in particular organisation in London may well be looking at it now. It's such a narrow victory and a hollow victory, it has to be said, because the whole of the Conservative Party didn't vote for it, that it may well have some challenges yet. Where I share in Rosa's disappointment and totally sympathise, particularly given Rosa's own position, but and for all those who've come here as refugees, is sends wrong signals. It's again another step of us becoming ever more brutal and little as a Britain, and from a party that Theresa May, way back in an early conference in 2003, said she wanted to rebrand it away from being a nasty party, is doing exactly the opposite and becoming ever more the nasty party of the UK.
Well, we've just got to hope then that the challenge goes through. But who knows? Anyway, we'll move on to our last story of this evening, and that is that the SNP warns of a threat to devolution. The SNP has warned of the ever-growing Tory threat to devolution, with the news that the Westminster government is again taking control of money in Scotland, while bypassing both the democratically elected Scottish Government and the scrutiny of the Scottish Parliament. The latest blatant Tory project designed to shore up support for the failing union is a £150 million fund, which they say sets aside £12.3 million for projects in Scotland to help community groups take over at-risk local facilities. However, the SNP points out that the Barnett rules governing devolution funding state that the £12.3 million Scottish share should be passed to the Scottish Government to decide on how they should spend it. They also highlighted how Tory Westminster control of Scotland's money before devolution leads to cuts and not extra cash, and how they have already slashed spending in England for local councils. So, Chris, it was reported in 2018 that John Major's government diverted cash from the Highlands to boost dwindling Conservative support in South East England. Do you think Boris's government will employ the same tactics, or do you think Jacob Rees-Mogg and Michael Gove will suddenly help and support devolution?
Okay, so to the second part of your question, there's not a chance that either Boris Johnson or Jacob Rees-Mogg have any time for devolution, let alone the Scottish Parliament. And I've made that pretty clear in things I've said in the past. What I would say is that this is not new. We, after the 2016 vote on Brexit, we realised then there was going to be a power grab. The Internal Market Bill points towards that. The Levelling Up Fund, which is essentially where an MP has to sign off on the funds that are going to be distributed rather than to their devolved powers, but to the local councils, but really putting power to members of Parliament, which is not the right place to be making it, frankly. It's nothing short of pork barrel politics. So this is just another extension of trying to erode devolution in Scotland. And the irony of all of this is that they think if they can stick a flag on the side, a Union Jack, and say paid for by the UK government, that somehow that's going to strengthen the union. What it will do for most people, because most people are pretty savvy about how things are working these days, certainly in Scotland, will just find it obnoxious and clearly an infringement on the very things that they support, most namely Scottish Parliament, and also for Scotland's right to decide its own future.
And Rosa, can investment via devolution help maintain the prosperity of rural communities and perhaps even encourage young people to seek jobs still within Scotland?
Devolution has helped Scotland, and that's fundamentally the fact. And further devolution will help Scottish society. And going back to your question, employment, creating more jobs, which will help the economy in Scotland. However, the government are trying to, and Chris rightly have mentioned the internal market, they're trying to undo devolution in Scotland, taking powers away from the Scottish people. And this is, I think, what they're trying to do.
Yeah, and Chris, if the Tories have had questionable COVID contract procurement, do you think we can trust them to spend money on Scottish community projects?
Absolutely not. It's not only about how they spend the money or who they spend it on or which chums they've got in certain organisations. It's also what is the true cost, because ultimately what this could lead to is further cuts, which will of course impact our communities, both urban and rural. The lack of understanding of these communities is clearly reflected in the fact that Tories weren't able to gain a single seat in the Scottish May elections, and in fact are deeply concerned about the council elections next year. Fishermen, to talk rurally just for a second, fishermen and farmers saw how much they were sold out under Brexit. Local councils have been working incredibly hard to try and improve their cities and towns with the restrained resources that they've had over the last decade as a result of austerity. So this idea of coming in with sweeteners, this will be clearly to try and gain votes, particularly in councils where Conservatives are either in power or in shared power with the Labour Party, as we've seen, for example, I think it is in Stirling, if I'm not mistaken. But also, it doesn't prioritise resources that should be able to decide at a national level as well. So you can have pet projects, for example, that are decided on. Now, the principle of what they wish to do in terms of the community renewal fund is a good thing in itself. But we already do that in our communities. We have projects, we have community buyouts, which can be applied for through individuals or organisations within each of our council. So this isn't something new. This is purely political and purely about the politicisation of our councils away from our Scottish Government and away from our devolved power of our Scottish Parliament.
So do you think then that the £150 million fund is essentially a power grab?
Yes, in a nutshell. There's no other word for it. It's a continued power grab. It's not a one-off. It's going to be sustained. And I'm not sure where next it will come in the future. But this is a way of trying to bolster what's left of an already tattered union. And frankly, if you go back to the days of when the Scottish Parliament was set up, and Donald Dewar had a very different vision for devolution within the union, something that today, the Tories wouldn't recognise, but something that people kind of embraced. He understood that in order for a union to work, you need nations of equals, maybe not with the same powers, because that would come through independence, which I obviously support, but certainly nations that work together amicably and equitably. You don't do that by trying to divert monies which are already meant to be with your devolved powers elsewhere in order to try and gain votes to an ever smaller audience. And in doing so, all you do is you break the trust and bond, and that's the important point, the trust and bond with the people of these nations. And that's why I think moves like this will only backfire and will accelerate the pace towards Scotland's own independence.
And Rosa, my last question goes to you, and that is there a danger that only Conservative and Lib Dem constituencies will apply for these funds, especially regarding the £250,000 matched funding? I mean, will deprived areas not find this quite difficult to get this £250,000?
Yeah, I think Chris highlighted it very well. I think this will backfire on the Tories, and I think it has dropped in trust. But going back to this, I think they would be applying for it, but I think it's not helping Scotland.
Brilliant. Well, that is all for this evening. Thank you to both you, Rosa and Chris. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you both on the programme this evening. And thank you to everyone watching at home as well. If you would like to support Broadcasting Scotland, then just follow the link at the bottom of your screen just now. Thanks again for watching.
Thanks.